Okay, we're going to take some notes today, just on a couple of different, not random, but fraction, decimal topics. Your notes are either on page 10 or page 16. That is a blank page. It should look like this one. It says learning log title at the top, but nothing else written on it. So go ahead and find that page. It is at the beginning of chapter 2, the pre-printed notes. So find that and you'll be ready to start. Okay, so we're going to start talking about fractions and the difference between a fraction like this and a fraction like this. That when we convert these into decimals, if we go 1 divided by 4, right? I put my decimal point there. From 10, I can get 2 groups of 4 out of there. That's 8. I subtract. I get a 2 there. I'm going to add a 0. 0 here that comes down. And from 20, that's 5 groups of 4. And I'm done, right? So 1/4 is 0.25 in decimal form. And that is what we call a terminating decimal because it ended, right? We got to 0.25 after the 5. We had no remainder, so we're finished. Okay, now the 1/3, and I'm going to erase because that was just how we did the work, but I don't need to keep that. And I'm going to deal with the 1/3. 1 divided by 3, put in my decimal point, add a 0. Well, from 3, I can get 3 groups of 3, that's 9. I subtract, and there's 1 left over. Add a 0, bring it down. From 10, again, I get 3 groups of 3, put a 9, subtract, I get a 1. And you're like, uh-oh, this is just going to keep happening. So we put 0.3, and I put a little line over the top of the 3 that says that is a repeating decimal. Right? So those are the two kinds of decimals we get, terminating or repeating. Repeating means as long as I keep dividing, I'm going to get 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. And sometimes when they repeat, it's not the same number. It could be 0.125, 125, 125, but there's a repeating pattern there. Okay, so 2 types of decimals, which we've talked about. How do I change a fraction into a decimal? How do I change a decimal back into a fraction, right? 0.25, I'm just going to write this, and you don't need to write this down. Just watch. Okay, whoops, didn't want that line there, sorry. Erase. If I take 0.25, that's a little sloppy, and I want to make it into a fraction, right? I put the 25 on top, and there's 2 decimal places there, 2 zeros, 25 hundredths, and when I reduce that fraction, I get back to the 1/4, boom, that I started with. That's how I change a terminating decimal into a fraction. But what if I have a repeating decimal that I need to change back to a fraction? That is different, and that's why we're talking about this today. Repeating decimal to fraction. Okay, so we'll talk about the 1/3, which is 0.3 repeating. Okay, the way you change this, I'm just going to explain it, is you start off like you would, right? And we're going to put the 3 on the top, just like we did there. We put the 0.25 on the top. So the 3 goes there. We don't need the line over it, but that line means we're going to take this, what we would have put in the denominator, which this is 3/10. If it's not repeating, it's 3/10. And you subtract 1 from the place value. Well, if it wasn't repeating, the place value there on that 3 is tenths, right? So 10 minus 1 means we put a 9 there. So that's 3/9. Well, 3/9 I can reduce. I didn't leave myself a lot of space to reduce there. If I divide by 3/3, and I get 1/3, which I know from looking back up here is what I should get, right? Because I started with a third. and I got 0.3 repeating. So let me do another example of that. Okay, let's say, here's an example. Draw the line. I'm going to do another example. Let's say I have the one I mentioned before, 0.125. I want to change that repeating, right, to repeating decimal. Think about it like that line on the top means you got to subtract one. So I'm going to go the decimal value in the numerator, 125. In the denominator, that's 1, 2, 3 tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So it would be 1,000, but I subtract 1. Well, 1,000 minus 1 is 999, and that's my fraction. I don't have to reduce it. I could. Well, I don't even know if I could on that one. But I don't have to. That's my answer. I can leave it that way. So actually it does reduce, but I'm not going to worry too much about that one, right? That is how we change a repeating decimal into a fraction, because it's possible because all decimals have a fraction equivalent. So we have to have a way to do that. Okay, just think about that repeating line reminding you that you are subtracting 1 from what the denominator would have been if you didn't have a repeating decimal. Okay, a little bit change of tune here. We're going to talk for a second about mixed numbers. What is a mixed number? A mixed number is when we have a fraction with a whole number out in front. Let's say we have 2 1/3, right? This means we have, I'm going to write it over here. Well, no, I'll do it here. We have 2 full groups and 1 out of 3, right? And so we have 2 full groups and then a partial group. So let's say we had circles, circles, circle, circle. We have 2 full circles, shaded all the way in. 1 circle, 2 circles, and then we have another circle that would have been divided into 3 equal parts. But right now, we're only having 1 of them. So 2 and 1 out of 3, 2 1/3, that is a mixed number, right? It can also be written as a fraction. If we want to change this to, and this is review, I hope you know this, but it's a little review if you don't. Sometimes your elementary teachers call this the wheel. We have 2 groups of 3. That tells us we multiply. 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 extra. So 6 plus 1 extra makes 7. And the denominator, like it always does, doesn't change because we still had groups of 3, right? This, if we look at these other circles, if they were cut into groups of 3, which technically they were, we had all of them, right? So now if we count this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that we have out of 3 to make a full group. That's how we change a mixed number into a fraction. And what happens when we have a mixed number, that fraction is what we call improper because the number on the top is larger than the number on the bottom. So improper fraction. If we need to go back the other way, right, we want to take that improper fraction, 7/3, and make it a mixed number. Well, we do the same way when we change any fraction into a decimal. It's division. 7 divided by 3. 3 goes into 7. 2, right? 2 groups of 3 is 6. And so the 2 full groups right there. And when I subtract, that leftover piece is my numerator. And the denominator, which was 3, is still 3. So that's changing mixed number into a fraction, fraction back to a mixed number. And really that little picture I drew you, that's what's happening, right? It's how many groups you have out of how many does it take to make a full group. Well, you have more pieces than it takes to make one full group. That's why we get that number out in the front of the fraction.